Istočnik. The day Rachel almost missed her own promotion was a Tuesday in March. She'd known about the dinner for 6 weeks. Her company had reserved a private room at a restaurant downtown, the kind of place with cloth napkins and a fixed menu and actual good lighting. And her director had told her personally that she'd be recognized at the event, that the regional VP would be there, that this was the kind of evening that mattered for the trajectory of where things were going. Rachel had put it in her calendar with a small star next to it, which was the closest she came to allowing herself to be excited about something. Her mother called at 4:15 that afternoon. "I don't feel well," her mother said. "I've been dizzy since this morning. I think I need you to come." Rachel was her desk. She had 90 minutes before she needed to leave to go home, change, and get downtown in time. "Have you taken your blood pressure medication today?" she asked. "I don't remember. I might have. I'm dizzy, Rachel." "Did you eat lunch?" "I had something small. I wasn't hungry." Rachel closed her eyes briefly. The dizziness, when it came, was usually one of 3 things: the medication timing, low blood sugar, or anxiety. Her mother's anxiety, which was real and not performed, but which also had a way of arriving on significant occasions. "Mom, I have the work dinner tonight."
"The one I told you about."
A pause. "I know you have your dinner," her mother said. "I wouldn't call if I didn't feel this way. I'm not trying to ruin your evening." Rachel said, "I know, Mom." She meant it. She also knew, with the particular knowledge of someone who had been paying close attention for 7 years, that her mother's body and her mother's emotions were not always operating independently. She also knew that dizziness in a 78-year-old woman with a cardiac history was not something to dismiss categorically. She also knew that she had a star on her calendar and 90 minutes. She called her mother's neighbor, Mrs. Paulson, who had a key and was willing, and asked if she could check in. Mrs. Paulson said of course. Rachel texted her mother to say Mrs. Paulson was coming and she'd call between courses. She got in her car at 5:30 and drove home and changed in 12 minutes and got downtown with 7 minutes to spare. She sat through the dinner, acutely aware of her phone in her bag. She checked it under the table twice.
Mrs. Paulson had texted.
"She's fine, having tea. I'm staying a bit." Her mother had texted. "I see you sent the neighbor." No period. The punctuation of mild injury. When her name was called and she stood up and the room applauded, she smiled and said the right things and felt, underneath all of it, the particular exhaustion of a person who has been managing 2 versions of their life for so long that neither one feels fully inhabited. She was 46 years old. Her mother was 78. Her mother lived 22 minutes away in the house she'd lived in for 40 years, in a suburb of Cleveland where Rachel had grown up, in a house that had too many stairs for someone with her mother's knees, and too many rooms for someone living alone, and her mother would not hear of moving. Rachel was an only child. Her father had died when she was 38. She had been effectively the entire support system for 8 years, the appointments, the pharmacy, the groceries, the calls, the visits, the decisions. She'd built her professional life around the geography of it, turning down opportunities that would have required relocation, shaping her schedule around availability, learning to read her mother's moods the way you learn to read weather. She did this because she loved her mother. She also did it because the alternative, the version of herself that didn't, felt from the inside like a person she couldn't recognize and didn't want to be. Her mother's name was Vivian. She was sharp and funny and opinionated and had a memory for small details. She remembered the names of Rachel's colleagues, the outcomes of cases Rachel mentioned in passing, the name of the restaurant where Rachel had gone on a date 3 years ago once. She also had the particular gift of making her needs feel like emergencies and her preferences feel like necessities, which was not calculation exactly, more a lifelong habit that had calcified in widowhood. She said things like, "I don't want to be a burden. She said this while asking Rachel to drive 45 minutes round trip to bring a specific brand of crackers available at the store 2 blocks from her own house. She said it in a tone that made the contradiction invisible, and Rachel, who had been absorbing this particular frequency her whole life, had long since stopped hearing it. What she heard instead was, "If you don't come, something will happen, and it will have been your fault." She understood, intellectually, that this was not what her mother said, but it was what arrived. The year after the promotion dinner was harder than the one before it. Vivian's mobility worsened. Not dramatically, not a single incident, just the gradual arithmetic of an aging body accumulating small subtractions. Rachel increased the visits from 3 times a week to 5. She hired a home aide for the mornings, a woman named Gloria, who was competent and warm, and whom Vivian treated, depending on the day, like a valued employee or an intruder in her own home. Rachel's social life, which had never been abundant, contracted further. She'd had a friend group, loosely maintained, the kind of friendships that required occasional investment to stay real. They sent messages she meant to answer, and invitations she meant to accept, and she kept up the meaning to without the doing, and the friendships thinned in the way that things thin when they're not tended. She'd been seeing someone, briefly, a man named Greg she'd met at a work conference. He was thoughtful and employed and genuinely interested in her, and she'd ended it after 4 months because the logistics of her life made her feel, as a romantic proposition, like something that came with too many conditions attached. She hadn't told Vivian about Greg. She'd known without testing it. That knowing would have produced a specific response. Concern performed as support. Questions asked in a way that required reassurance. And she'd decided it wasn't worth it. She did not let herself look directly at the fact that she was making choices about her own romantic life based on her mother's probable reactions. Or she looked at it briefly and then looked away, which was different from not looking. The incident with the conference happened in October. Rachel's company was sending her to Chicago for 4 days. Professional development, a significant opportunity, the kind that came with her name on the attendee list, and an implication that the company was investing in her future there. She'd arranged coverage with Gloria for the extra days. She'd prepared a detailed document for the home aide with schedules and contacts and contingencies. She told her mother on a Sunday afternoon. Vivian had been quiet for a moment. Then she said, 4 days. Yes. In Chicago. Yes. And if something happens? Vivian asked. I have a list of who to call. Gloria has it, your neighbor has it. I've talked to Dr. Hammond's office. I'm not talking about the list, Vivian said. She said it quietly, not dramatically. I'm talking about you being 4 hours away. I know. I'll have my phone. I can fly back if something's serious. Rachel. Her mother looked at her with an expression Rachel had seen many times, the one that meant the actual point was about to be made. You know how I am when I'm anxious. You know what this kind of thing does to me. Rachel knew. I'd feel so much better if you were just closer, her mother said. Is there a reason it has to be Chicago specifically? She went to Chicago. She told herself she was going, and she went. And she called twice a day and texted, and the calls were fine. Her mother was fine, Gloria was there, Mrs. Paulson checked in, and the conference was genuinely good, the best professional experience she'd had in 2 years, and the whole time she was there, she felt as though she were tethered to Cleveland by a wire that was just slightly too short. She came home on a Thursday afternoon and went directly to her mother's house before her own apartment, and Vivian was in her chair watching television and said, You look tired, in a way that was both true and not only observational. Rachel drove home that night and sat in her car in the parking garage for 4 minutes before going inside. Just sat. The thing she felt, which she had no clean language for, was something between grief and anger, and both of those felt wrong. Grief implied loss, anger implied injustice, and her mother was 78 and alone, and her knees hurt, and her husband was dead, and she'd given Rachel a home and a childhood, and she was not a villain, and none of this was clear. But Rachel was 46 years old, and she was exhausted in a way she couldn't fully explain to anyone. And she had been to Chicago for 4 days and come home feeling guilty about it, and the guilt felt like the indicator of something she didn't want to name yet. She named it eventually. Or someone else did, which was easier.
Her friend Diane, one of the friends she'd let thin, who had persisted anyway with the patient constancy of someone who understood a long game, had started going to a therapist and had mentioned it in a low-key way over lunch in November, and Rachel had listened and then mentioned carefully that she'd been thinking about it. "You should go," Diane said. "You really should." "It's hard to find the time." Diane looked at her. "When did you last do something just for yourself? Not for your mom, not for work, just for you?" Rachel thought about it. She thought about it for long enough that the answer was obvious. "Okay," Diane said. "Yeah." The therapist's name was Dr. Okafor. She was a compact woman in her 50s, with a methodical quality to her that Rachel found unexpectedly comforting. She didn't rush. She asked questions that required more than a single sentence to answer, and then actually waited for the sentences. Rachel went for the first time in December and talked for 50 minutes about her mother, her schedule, the conference, the dinner 3 years ago, the wire that was slightly too short. "Doctor." Okafor listened. At the end she said, "What would it cost you to say no to your mother once? Not in an emergency, just in a non-emergency situation. What do you imagine would happen?" Rachel thought about it. "She'd be hurt," she said. "And then what?" I don't know, she'd be upset." "And then what?" Rachel looked at her hands. "I don't know." "That's worth thinking about," Dr. Okafor said. "The thing you're protecting against. How clearly can you actually see it?" She thought about it for weeks. She went back in January and talked about it more. She talked about being a child in Vivian's house, about the specific atmosphere of a home where one parent's emotional weather organized everything else, about the years of calibrating herself to her mother's needs as a primary navigation system, about how it had felt at 38 when her father died, like an assignment she'd been given without being asked whether she wanted it. "You love your mother, Doctor." Okafor said, "Yes." "Is that in question for you?" No, it wasn't. This was the confusing part. The love was real and not strategic, and not the source of the problem. I love her, and I'm also... What? Rachel looked at the window. Outside, Cleveland in January was doing what Cleveland in January does. "I'm disappearing," she said, "a little at a time. And I keep thinking that's what it means to be a good daughter." Dr. Okafor was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "When you imagine the version of you that continues like this for another 10 years, what does she look like?" Rachel didn't answer immediately. She knew what the answer was. She'd been not looking at it for a long time. If you've ever called your own exhaustion love and believed it, stay with this, because what comes next is hard and also necessary. And if this channel is where you come for these stories, subscribe. We're here. There was a neighbor, not Mrs. Paulson, another one, a woman named Helen who lived at the end of her mother's street and was in her mid-80s, who Rachel had spoken to occasionally over the years in the way you speak to people who exist in the geography of your life without being in the life itself. She ran into Helen in February at the pharmacy 2 blocks from Vivian's house. Helen was there picking up her own prescriptions, moving slowly but not unhappily, and they'd ended up in a small conversation that extended into the parking lot. Helen's daughter lived in Arizona. She'd moved there for a job 8 years ago and then stayed, and they talked on the phone and visited twice a year, and Helen said, simply and without apparent resentment, "She has her life. I have mine. That's how it should be." Rachel must have looked something in response to this because Helen paused. "You're Vivian's daughter," Helen said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Helen looked at her for a moment. "How are you doing?" The question landed differently than it usually did when people asked it. Helen asked it the way you ask someone you actually want to know about. Rachel stopped. "It's a lot," she said. "Some days." Helen nodded. She wasn't hurrying the conversation. "My mother was like Vivian," she said. "When I was raising my kids, she needed a lot. I lived 20 minutes away and she needed a lot." She paused. "I burned myself down trying to be enough for her. For years. And then one day I understood that she'd actually rather have a smaller piece of a healthy daughter than everything from a hollow one." Rachel stood in the pharmacy parking lot in February. "Did you talk to her about it?" she asked. "Your mother?" "Eventually. It was hard." Helen looked at her without pity, which was the right way to look at someone in this situation. "She was hurt at first. She thought I was pulling away. I had to say it more than once before she heard it as what it was." She paused. "But she did hear it, eventually. Mothers usually do. They want their children to be okay. Even when they're making it harder for them to be okay, they still want it." Rachel thought about this for a long time after. She thought about it through February and into March, into another set of appointments and groceries and calls, and one evening when Vivian mentioned that Rachel's cousin's daughter visited her grandmother every single week without fail, which was not an accident of conversation. She went back to Dr. Okafor. "I think I need to talk to her," Rachel said. "But I don't know how to do it without her thinking I'm leaving. I'm not leaving. I just need her to understand that I can't keep..." "What do you need her to understand?" Dr. Okafor asked. Rachel thought about it. "That I love her and I'm not going anywhere, and I also need some of my life back, pieces of it. I need to be able to go to a conference without feeling like I've abandoned her. I need to be able to say I can't come tonight and have that not be a catastrophe." She paused. "I need to be allowed to be a person who also has a life." "Can you say it that simply to her?" "I don't know if she'll hear it that simply." "Probably not at first," Dr. Okafor said, "but that's different from it not being worth saying." She chose a Sunday afternoon. Not random. Sunday afternoons were historically better. Vivian was generally rested, the week hadn't accumulated yet. Gloria wasn't there, and it was just the two of them. Rachel brought food, which was always a gentle anchor. They ate. They talked about ordinary things. Vivian was in a reasonable mood, which Rachel had been waiting for without admitting she was waiting for it. Then Rachel said, "Mom, I want to talk to you about something." Vivian looked at her. Something shifted in her expression, the subtle brace of a person who has a radar for incoming difficulty. "I'm not going anywhere," Rachel said first. "I want to say that first. I'm going to keep being here. I'm going to keep helping." Her mother waited. "But I need things to be a little different. Not drastically, just different enough that I can last." She looked at her mother. "Because right now, I'm not lasting very well, and I think you can probably see that." Vivian's face was unreadable. "I've been doing this for 8 years," Rachel said, And I want to keep doing it. I want to be here for you. But I need to be able to go to a conference for 4 days without spending the whole time feeling like I'm doing something wrong. I need to be able to miss one evening sometimes and know that Gloria or Mrs. Paulson can cover it, and that's okay. She paused. I need you to understand that when I do those things, it's not because I don't love you. It's because I'm trying to make sure I can still love you well in 10 years, or 5, or even next year. The room was quiet. Vivian looked at her hands for a moment. I didn't know it was this bad, she said, that you felt this way. I know. I should have said something sooner. I didn't mean... Her mother stopped. I don't want to make your life smaller. I don't want that for you. I know you don't. Rachel meant it. She did know this. The difficulty of Vivian's dependency was not malicious, had never been malicious, was just the shape that need took in a person who was aging and afraid and had never quite learned to ask for things directly. I just get scared, Vivian said. When you're not close. I know, that's real. And I'm not asking you to stop being scared. I'm asking you to trust that scared doesn't have to mean emergency. Rachel looked at her mother. You've been handling things for almost 80 years. You're more capable than you let yourself remember. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. The neighbor woman came, she said finally, while you were in Chicago. We had tea. I know, she told me. It was fine. A pause. It was actually... She didn't finish the sentence, but her expression finished it. It was fine, Rachel said gently. Her mother looked at her. I make it harder than it needs to be, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Sometimes, Rachel said. Me too. Vivian looked at the window. The March light was thin and pale and not unpleasant. Your father used to tell me I had a gift for catastrophizing, she said. I told him he was oversimplifying. Was he right? A pause. A very small, very Vivian pause. Probably about 60%, she said. Rachel laughed. It came out more completely than she'd expected. A real laugh, not a polite one. And after a moment, Vivian smiled too. The real one, the one Rachel had loved since she was small. It was not a fixed thing after that. Nothing about it was fixed or finished. There were still the calls that came when they didn't need to, still the evenings when Vivian made her absence felt through careful phrases. There were still times when Rachel felt the wire and checked her phone and drove 40 minutes when she might have stayed. There were still conversations where the boundaries she'd drawn got tested, not aggressively, just with the persistence of habit and loneliness. But the conversation had happened. It lived in the room now, between them, which was different from Rachel carrying it alone. She started saying, on some evenings, I can't tonight, Mum. Gloria is there. Call me later. And she said it without the long apology, without the backup plan offered before it was needed, without the particular collapse of someone who has already conceded before the conversation started. Sometimes Vivian said, okay. Sometimes there was a silence that communicated hurt. Both of those things happened, and Rachel held them, and the world did not end in either case. She called Diane back. She accepted 2 invitations she would previously have declined. She went to a dinner party in April where she stayed until 10:30, which was later than she'd stayed at anything social in 2 years. And she didn't check her phone once. She went back to Dr. Okafor monthly and talked about the smaller adjustments, the ones that felt minor and turned out not to be. The conversation at lunch where she told a colleague, honestly, that she was managing caregiver fatigue and how it felt to use that phrase out loud. The Saturday morning she spent doing nothing except reading, not because her mother hadn't called, but because she'd seen the call and let it go to voicemail for 2 hours. And listened to the message afterward, and it had been about a television program. In June, she had dinner with a man named David who worked in her building and had asked her twice. He was interesting, and she laughed at dinner and told him, without performing reluctance, that she helped care for her mother, and it was a real part of her life. He said that made sense, that his family had been through something similar, and they talked about it the way adults talk about real things, and it hadn't been the end of something, but the beginning of a different kind of conversation. In July, her mother called on a Thursday and said, "I spoke to Helen today. The woman at the end of the street. We had coffee in her garden." "That's nice, Mom," Rachel said. "She's an interesting woman. Did you know her daughter lives in Arizona?" "I knew that. She's very settled about it. Helen, she seems, I don't know, content." A pause. "I've been thinking about it." Rachel waited. "I don't want to be the reason you're unhappy," her mother said. "I want you to know that. If I've been—" She didn't finish it. "I don't want that." "I know," Rachel said. "I love you," her mother said, which she said every call, but this time it landed in a slightly different place. "I love you too, Mom." She meant it the same as always, and also differently than she had in years. Not as a statement accompanied by obligation, not as the header of a contract, just as a fact. One real thing, unencumbered. She was 47 years old. Her mother was 79. They had, between them, whatever time they had, and Rachel had decided she would spend it as a whole person. Not a perfect daughter, not a failing one, just a person who loved her mother and had a life and was learning, slowly, imperfectly, in the ongoing way of things that don't have a fixed endpoint, that those two things could exist in the same place at the same time. She didn't stop helping. She didn't disappear. She drove over on Saturday mornings and brought the good bread from the bakery near her apartment, and they drank coffee and talked about the week. And some mornings it was easy, and some mornings there was still that undercurrent, the old gravity. But she came home afterward. She went to her own life, which was still being built, which wasn't finished. She was glad it wasn't finished. If this story gave you something to think about, whatever side of it you're on, leave a few words in the comments. Not answers, just what it brought up. Sometimes the most useful thing is knowing someone else is sitting with the same question. Take care of yourselves.